how are you? It's Jonathan Nguyen here.
Hey, I'm doing great. It's good to see you again. How you doing?
So good. I'm glad to see you're surviving through the third week of this current situation that we're working through.
I feel like Tom Hanks on that island with Wilson right now. I've lost track of time, but it's still going strong.
Yeah. Well, hey, I just wanted to have a quick call with you to talk about the service providers that I'm working with and try to get some insights from you. What I'm seeing are some interesting things, some things that were rather predictable and things that were a bit surprising. Most everyone executed their business continuity plans. They've been pretty successful at that. The networks were able to handle the surge. Talking about a spike of somewhere between 25 upwards of 30% of network traffic. They've been able to do that. They've been able to stagger their work shifts in the SOCs. The interesting things that they really were surprised by were that it's a global event. I don't think anybody in their business continuity plans had actually exercised for a global event. I think typically we had exercised with things like regional weather events, infrastructure disruptions, maybe labor strikes, things of that nature. But I don't think anyone had really anticipated a global shutdown and quarantining of work staffs, and then suddenly having to deliver services with, for instance, a SOC team that's working remotely, and that's been a bit challenging.
Yeah, and the attack surface has shifted with that as well to the same point, right? That it introduces regional aspects of it, but I mean, like you said, this is like a lot of organizations have to deal with, service providers have to deal with this at a global stage now.
Yeah. So I think that's been the other observation is that the quote attack surface is so large now that it's very hard to implement behavioral-based detection, because so many of the business processes that we've all gone through those data and process classification exercises, right? And now everything has changed. And so the workloads may be in different places, the workers are in different places, the customers are in different places, and the requests for network access are not what we had baselined. And so, traditional approaches around anomalous behavior becomes difficult when everything is anomalous, right?
Exactly, like and each baseline is different for each environment, right? Now it's not just that one gold standard environment.
Yeah. So what I've seen actually is a refocus into those basic elements, things that we should have been doing well up to this point, irrespective of the situation, but basic security hygiene, multi-factor authentication, encryption, zero trust networking principles, the idea about inspecting every request for network access. And those challenges are just much more exacerbated right now when you've got people working from their personal devices, they're working for any number of devices, in some cases their phones. I think one of the interesting conversations I had was with an operations director who said, look, we've got 2,000 people, and suddenly now I've got a surge in terms of hardware. I've got to send out endpoints that they can use. I've got licensing issues as well. And I've got to do all this through remote access. So that part's been surprising.
Yeah, and the thing is now, like you said, this is the uncharted territories, right? There's no golden baseline, like we said, and we're seeing a whole bunch of things within FortiGuard. He's talking about business continuity with this attack surface. Obviously, these are service providers that can bring bandwidth traffic to end users, bring solutions. When it comes to those end users themselves, though, a lot of organizations are relying on business continuity in each one of those locations, i.e. if that end user gets compromised, this new mobile device PC that they're using, that could severely disrupt business operations, right? And so we're seeing a lot of challenges, like things like services that weren't opened up before, like RDP as an example, remote desktop protocols, the #1 attack we're seeing in FortiGuard Labs. We're seeing issues of and there's silver linings to this, because it is bringing it front and center, things that we've talked about for years, which is great. But things like segmentation, right? You talked about cyber hygiene. We're talking about self-isolation to reduce spread of viruses and disruption. That's the same thing in terms of segmentation. Obviously, a lot of these networks have other traffic locally on them that can be problem points too.
So that's pretty interesting and very telling about how efficient the dark side works, right? That irrespective of what's happening around the world, the threat actors are able to coordinate, develop new threat vectors, and seemingly execute them very well. I'm hearing that that there's a lot more very targeted, specific attacks being developed around remote working situations to take advantage of, disparate architectures, lack of security awareness, and just disruption to the daily work routine. Are you seeing that as well at FortiGuard?
Yeah, definitely. So we've released some blogs recently. There's been a surge in virus activity. If you look collectively from January to March, we're up in March alone. It's up over 130% year over year. So those viruses are coming with a lot of phishing attacks, social engineering, capitalizing and really adapting to this new attack service, right? The teleworkforce. The other thing, Jonathan, is that now keep in mind that it's not just trained and educated, or should be educated, employees that are sitting within an organization. On these networks are your employees, but also their kids, spouses, family that might not be trained. And we always talk about lateral movement and springboard attacks, and this is ripe opportunity. This is what we're starting to see from cyber criminals adapt and capitalize this. So I'm talking about social engineering campaigns that are going after gaming platforms, as an example, because those are all over households. But again, if those users fall prey to those and their personal devices are affected, they can easily springboard and go into any employee that's sitting on the same network.
Yeah, so I think the NIST guidance that was issued around remote working and COVID-19 is very telling, because up to this point, we talk about zero trust networking principles with the idea that no one should be trusted, whether it's inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. I think the shift now is there's a presumption that the entire operating environment is hostile, and that you should presume that you're constantly under attack, and that irrespective of whether you're working in an office, in your home office, or anywhere during this particular situation, the presumption is it's a hostile environment and that you are actively under attack. I think up to this point, there'd been a certain sense of neutrality with things like you may be under attack, you may be being probed, you may being surveyed, but changing that to a presumption that you are under a persistent attack is a very interesting shift in the operating models.
Yeah, and it's a reality too, though, right? So I think it's a good shift. This is something that I firmly agree with. I'm a big believer in it, right? The zero trust environments, and it's especially important now. I mean, again, if you just think as an end user, they're literally sitting in their homes. Who are you going to invite into your house, right? It's the same thing. We talk about social distancing. It's the same thing we've been talking about with the concept of cyber distancing. In other words, just having a larger safeguard, right? There's always a sense of security generally in this presumption that it's not a problem up until if and when it happens. Shifting that time frame until it's just a matter of not if, but when, and that is happening. And like I said, we're seeing the numbers in FortiGuard Labs, 130% increase just in virus activity. There's a definite shift. So really, I think it's more important than ever to have that safeguard, and what better way than zero trust concepts or the NIST guidance like you're talking about.
Yeah, I just think it's just harder today because the attack surface is so much broader now, and the requests for network access are coming from so many locations. And so one of the interesting sessions I had this week with an operator was refocusing on UEBA capabilities, right? So let's say you are having a hard time determining what is an anomalous request for network access because it's coming from so many places and so many different locations and times, and in some cases and devices. And so let's really look at who your critical people are, who has privileged access, and focus on what happened to the data, who's accessing the critical parts of your infrastructure, the critical workloads and applications, and what's the final disposition. So are they downloading it to catch media? Are they uploading it? And I think it's interesting that in this time of flux, we're really talking about the stuff we learned, at least for me, back in the 90s. Remember that? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? We're still talking about the basics, no matter how far we've strayed from those original operating principles. It still comes down to that. And I think more than ever, the availability portion of CIA, which is something that was somewhat overlooked, I think. So many people were focused on confidentiality and integrity, but availability is becoming more key than ever. But I think using UBA right now to allow the understanding what happened to the data, the key data, is one method of getting around a situation where behavior-based detection is hard, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I just had a workshop earlier today with the Ponemon Institute. So average cost of a data breach in the US is sitting at $3.92 million, according to their statistics. And, you know, according to a lot of CISOs I was talking to, the prevention is the ideal. It's the end goal, right? To have 100% prevention. That's not a reality all the time. So a lot of emphasis on detection and response is becoming quite critical, especially in today's environment, right? Like I said, it's not a matter of if but when, but how do you detect those threats? Like you said, they're coming. It's a challenge, right? Because they're coming from everywhere. There's so many more ports and bandwidth and services, that proverbial needle in a haystack. So, you know, to me, the focus on the detection and response of these threats goes a long way. It keeps it's a good proactive measure instead of just trying to proactively prevent. There's always a time and a place for prevention. We need to do that, but there's a larger emphasis right now on detection and response as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in my next call, I've got to go work with someone on helping this MSSP ensure that their employees are accessing their control applications and workloads in a secure fashion. Meaning their end users are concerned that the SOC analysts are accessing their applications from remote locations, and they want to have assurance that their data is not being compromised from a SOC analyst. And the SOC analyst is not under attack, but we all know at this point that the service providers are being targeted specifically. So, hey, next time I'm going to call you and get your thoughts on the threats that service providers are facing, and let's talk about, you know, how they're practically approaching that. Okay?
Yeah, definitely from the MSSP angle too, for sure. I'd be happy to.
All right, man. Well, you take care.
All right.
And hopefully we'll be able to catch up in a couple of days. All right.
Absolutely. Stay safe.
All right, man. Thanks.